Okay, good morning everybody, and welcome to today's lecture. It will be the last lecture of the semester, now in computer vision. So what we will do today is we will look again at generating images, and this time some maybe really more artificial images like deep dream images and style transfer images. You remember last week we already looked at methods to generate images. So we basically looked at three methods. One was using a convolutional neural network to directly come up with probabilities of the individual pixel, depends on the pixels that were already in the images. Then a second approach was variational autoencoder, where we tried to learn encoding for an image so that we can then get a random value, a random sample out of the encoding latent space and generate the image out of that. And the third method was GANs, so a generative adversarial network, where two neural networks are trained. One network tries to produce an image that is as realistic as possible, while the other one tries to discriminate between real images and fake images. And today we will look first a little bit more at some techniques of that. So here are actually the topics for today. So one is image to image transfer, so an extension to the GANs that you have as input an image and not just noise as we had last time, and then you produce an image here. So here you have a labeled image where you have, for example, windows, balcons, roof, etc., and it will produce a picture then of the house. So here is the image that was produced using the network, and here is the actual ground truth of that. Another technique we will look at is those images that Google came up with, Deep Dream. Some a bit strange image that enhance some of the features or the activations that the image actually sees, or that the network actually sees, and tries to enhance them in the image, leading to those bit weird looking pictures here. And then the last one will be style transfer, where you have two images as input. One image you take as a content, and the other image you take as the style of the image, and you try to have an image that has the content from this and the style from the other images. And we will see how this is done. Okay, so let's start with the first one. So these are called conditional GANs. They're used for image to image transfer. So if you remember last time, the GANs, once the GAN is trained, then you just feed the generator with some random noise, and then it will produce an image. So this is the generator function, which is then modeled in a network that does this transfer. So with a conditional GAN, you not only have as input the noise vector, but you have some other image, and then you will try to generate a new image both from the image and the noise. So actually what has been viewed, it's a bit difficult with the noise here to get some meaningful noise input. Why do you want a noise input anyway? It's so that you will not get exactly the same image every time. But adding noise has been proven a bit difficult. So another approach would be to use a dropout as noise, so that you just cut some of the layer connections there. So here is an example also how it works from an actual application. So what they did is they wanted to train a GAN, so that if the input is an edge map of the image, like here, then it should generate a real image. So to fill out the image with color. So this then was trained from the edge map. You generate your image, and then for the discriminator to know if it is a real image or not. It's then not sufficient to just give him the generated image, but you will also give it the input. So the discriminator then has to find out if this image was generated from that input, either fake or real. So the discriminator also gets the input to the image in the case of these conditional GANs. Okay, for that, they looked at some different architectures, some architecture that I think you have seen by now, like the encoder-decoder architecture, where you just go down with the resolution of the image during the processing steps and do some upscaling. Or we have seen what is called the UNet, which is quite similar, except that we have some connections between the layers, which help a little bit to maybe restore the resolution or the final resolution of the image. So they found out that the UNet actually worked a bit better for those conditional GANs. So let's look at some examples. So here is another application where you trained image-to-image GAN to generate the image at night or at day. So as input, for example, you will give it that image from daylight. Then the ground truth is this is the image at nighttime, and this here is the generated image at nighttime. I think some of them are quite nice. Of course, it takes the structure maybe of the clouds and so more from the input image, and here expected some more lights, but not exactly the same, but it looks like it could be an image at night. So sometimes it looks okay, but maybe it's not exactly like the image. So for example, here the ground truth has a lot of traffic at night, which was not present here, and so it just produces a night image without the traffic here. Or here from edges, here it's handbags from edges. So as input, then you could just draw a handbag. This would be the ground truth. It does not produce the ground truth, but it produces something that really looks like a handbag. Also, for example, here, maybe it didn't expect a pink backpack, but it produces a backpack that looks like it could be a real picture, I think. So the textures are not correct, but overall I think they look quite convincing. Okay, so before we go to the next topic, we will see in the topic we will need a little bit of visualization of neural networks. So let's just quickly look of what can be done in visualization of neural networks. So you would like to try to find out what the neural network actually does and what are the possibilities that you could visualize what the network comes up with. So in the first layers of the network, you usually have just filter operations, and those filter operations you can actually just display in a color-coded or height map or a black and white image. So here are some layers from the first layer of the AlexNet. So this is a bit easier to visualize because at that time they used larger filters, and so you could see like here it's some kind of two edge detectors here, or here maybe some pattern detector here that you can see. Or the ResNet, the filters are a bit smaller, so it's a bit harder to see, but you also see these line or edge detectors here. What else did they try to do to visualize the network? One idea is feature comparison. So what you can do is you take some image, you look at the last vector before you go to the logits and the softmax. So this is the feature vector actually that the convolutional neural network produces. For example, I think in the AlexNet here, it was like 4000 dimensional. And what you can do is you could look at the training images that are closest in the feature vector as your input, as your test image here. And you see, you will actually find quite a similar images. So the feature vectors seem to capture the essence and the class of the image quite well. Or one other technique is you could just visualize activations in between the network, and this we will see is what we will use for the deep dream kind of image generation. What is meant by visualizing activations? So if you run that image and you look at the output at different convolutional layers, you could just see where do you have a large output. So the output will usually be after a ReLU function. So some of the outputs might be 0 because the ReLU cuts off the negative parts, but some of the outputs will be quite large. And if you see a large output, then it's probably some relevant feature that you detected in the input image. Or what you also have to try is occlusions. I think this is a nice approach. So you take an input image, you cut out some region of the input image, and you see what the network comes up with as a probability for the class. So if you cut out this region here, the probability of elephant will still be 95%, while if you cut out this region here, the probability will still be high, 75%, but it dropped 20%. So it seems that this region here is more important for the network to detect the class than this region here. And so you could use this to map the importance of certain regions in the images here. So here some examples. Already we have seen the elephant. So most relevant for the elephant seems to be the head region here, and not relevant is here the part of the image that actually does not contain an elephant. And for example, for the sheep here, there seem to be some regions here and here that are important, or for the go-kart, some regions here, and it also picked up some other go-karts here, which are important. Okay, so how can we use that now? So for this deep dreaming, we can use one of those techniques, namely the activation. And the idea is that we look at some activation in the network and we try to enhance it. So how can we try to enhance it? We just compute the normal activations of the image. So we just run the image through the network. Then we specified some specific layer where we wanted to look at the activations, and then we backpropagate. But in the backpropagation, we do not want to change the network, but we want to change the image. So we set the gradient of that layer equal to its activation and let it propagate back to the image. And then we update the image instead of the weights. And what is the idea? So we update the image in a way that when we run it forward again, it would even give a larger activation to that layer. And then we go back again, and so on and so on. So the idea is to generate the image that makes some special large activation in those chosen layers. Okay, I tried to have some example of that. Let me quickly get rid of the other screen here. So you should also have that on Moodle to try out. I ran it yesterday. It should still be run, but I will not execute all of the cells. Take some time here. So it uses TensorFlow, it's on TensorFlow version 1, so I tested it with the latest version 1 TensorFlow, which is 1.15, which seemed to work. So we have to get the weights of the network that we want to use, and so here we will use the inception network and the inception weights, and actually it's both the weights and the network is in there, so we will generate the network from that file here. And then they just do some renaming of the nodes and so to show the network a bit better. So first thing what we can do is when we run the network, we can just pick some internal nodes. So they just looked at some of the node in the inception network, and we will look at how the activations are for that, and we will propagate back those activations network, and we get something like that. So already some structures are generated in that image. So one idea a little bit to enhance that is not to use that at just one scale, but to apply that at different scales of the image, so at different resolutions, and put them all together, and then it even looks a bit nicer here. And that already looks nice, but there's a bit a better way to get the lower resolutions a bit better. So what they do is that they blurred the image a little bit, suppressing the higher frequency, so that they do not dominate in the process, that we also get some better overall structure of the image here. And then we can use that to render some specific activation here. So here then we just pick up some specific channel that we want to look at, and then we have some visualization of image that activates that channel best. So it's generated from random noise, and just that image will produce high activations in those specified channels. And here we can just try out some different channels here. So here I used 60 or 100, and if I just use another one, this still runs here. Where's the output for that? Okay. Yeah, seems my output is not running anymore. Let's see if it, okay, now it comes. So if you just use some other channel here, then it will just produce some other image that corresponds to the activations of that channels. So you really have to try out and find as nice a channel as possible to give you the image that you want. We can also just put the output of some channels together, and that would also get a mixed of those features. So apparently one of the channels had to do with houses, the other maybe more with trees, and so if you put it together you get that image here. So finally, if you really want to do the deep dream algorithm, you will start with an actual image and then add those activations adjustments to that image here. So I tried that. I took some image from Pilatus at the top, and then tried to optimize that here. And so this is a layer that apparently has to do with all the animals in the data set. So the inception is trained on the ImageNet. ImageNet challenge has a lot of animals. So here it tries to generate the image where it sees as many animals as possible. Or if you use some other channel, then here it's more with flowers. or here it seems to like birds particularly, so it fits in some birds and enhances those. Okay, so that was the deep dreaming. Let's go back to the slides. Okay, so this idea behind the deep dreaming is you change the image to make the activation that you chose as strong as possible. Okay, so now the next thing we want to look at will be the style transfer. In order to do the style transfer, we first look at the techniques that is then employed there, which is texture synthesis. So the idea is, if you have an image of a texture here, and you want to generate a larger image, for example, for a computer game or for some graphic application, how can you generate a larger image of the same textures? This is actually a problem that has been studied for quite a while, since it has many applications here. So the first approaches for that was just to replicate pixels and patches somehow and make sure that they fit together. But now with the neural networks, we can use another approach. We can just try to find a model of the texture and then just draw from that model. And when we draw from the model, we can draw it for a higher resolution or for a larger image. And so the model is then captured by a convolutional neural network. So the question is then now, how can we get a convolutional neural network that acts as a model for the texture? So where is that texture in the model? So the idea here is again to use the activations from some layers in the network. And the idea is then to have a network that produces an image with the same activations, then it will also be a similar image. Okay, so let's assume we pass just some image through our network, for example the VGGNet with only 3x3 filters here. Then at each layer we have the activations, and let's call them feature maps. So this is a feature vector for some dimension depending on that layer here. And now they find out it's not the best to use the feature vectors directly, but we use something calculate the Graham matrix to have the correlations between the features. So this Graham matrix is a matrix that describes like what this layer does, and it's just the sum of these dot products between different features vectors on that layer. So you could say it's like a condensed representation of all the features that are calculated on that layers. And these matrices have been found to actually describe the texture of the image at that level. Okay, so how can we generate now textures from that? We start with just an image that has a random noise, and we have given an original image and its Graham matrices, and now we use gradient descent to again manipulate the image and not the network to find another image that has similar Graham matrices. So the loss function is the mean squared distance between the matrices for the original and the generated image. And you can use the same standard forward and backward computation of the network. Just at the end of the back propagation, you apply the gradient to the image and not to the vectors, to the weights. Okay, here's some examples. So it depends a bit of how many layers you have used. So here is the original texture that you want to produce, and here is what you get if you use the gray matrices of those specific layers. So if you just use the first layer, you just see what the filters does in that layer. So this is more fine granular structure that maybe captures the color of the image, but not very much the texture. While if you go to a higher level layers here, then I think you get quite a nice representation of the texture here. So like this is completely generated from noise in order to resemble the same texture as this here. You see that if the image has more content and it's not really textures, then you get something a bit weirder here, but you see that on that layer the structures that are replicated get larger in comparison to the structures that you have here. Okay, so here is actually again how this looks in more detail. So what you have on this side is your input image from which you try to replicate the texture. So you run it through the network, and at each level you calculate the features, and from the features the gray matrices. Then from your noise image, or the image that you have at that stage, you also calculate the feature vectors and the gray matrices, and then you have your loss function, which is the differences between the two matrices, the original one and the one produced by your image. And your overall loss function could be a weighted sum of those loss functions at the layer. So the idea is you could incorporate more than one layer here in this comparison. And so then from the loss function, you apply it backwards to the back propagation through the network, and then change your image according to the loss function. So to make the loss function smaller here. And this will update your image, and then you run the whole cycle again. Okay, so this is how you can do a texture generation, and this idea of style transfer is actually that you would apply the texture of some image, which we will call the style image, to another image that we call the content image. So the idea is to have an image with roughly that content, so it should be recognizes the houses and the trees, but in the style of Van Gogh here, and then it will produce this one here. So the idea is actually we will see quite similar then to the texture generation. So you have your conditional neural network, and you try to reconstruct the content of the image on one side, and you also try to reconstruct the style of the image on the other side. And so for the content representation, also depends a bit what you have where in the network, where you have most information about the content, and we have the most information about the style. And so for the style, we will use the same that we have used for the texture generation, the gray matrices, and we will see for the content, we will use the features directly of the network. So for the content representation, we also have, as before, the filter responses at each layer, and now we can also run gradient descent in the noise images to generate image that has the same response. So remember already in the visualization, we have seen that similar images have similar feature vectors at the last layer, and this is exactly the idea to use. So we want to produce an image that generates the similar filter responses, mainly in the later layers. And we again do this by applying gradient descent through the network. So this time the loss function is the difference between the content between the features vector from the original image and the feature vectors from the generated image, and with this loss function we calculate the gradient and again update the image. So this was the content representation, and for the style representation we just use the same thing that we have used for the texture generation. So for the style we also calculate the filter responses, but then we calculate those gray matrices that we have seen before, which is the sum of the dot products of all the feature vectors at one layer. And again then we can calculate the difference between the gray matrices from the original and the generated image as the loss function, and this we can include from several layers. Okay, so similar picture than before, but here is how it looks all together. So on one side we have the style image, we calculate the gray matrices, and we calculate a loss function by the difference between the matrices from the original and the generated image. Okay, and the total loss for style is the sum of those differences across different layers. On the content side, we calculate just the feature vectors, not the gray matrices, and we also select some layers, could be different layers. Then for the style representation, calculate the loss function as the difference in those feature representations between the original and the generated image. And then we take it all together and have a combined loss function with a loss for the content and the loss for style and maybe some parameters, so that we can say, okay, I want a bit more style or I want a bit more content there. Okay, so whenever you run then the algorithms, there is also, you start with a noise image. So because you start with a noise image, your image that you end up with will not look at the same always, but they look, as you can see, very similar, but in detail where those dots here around objects here appear is not the same, because this here, the sky here is more generated from the style, while the houses always appear more or less on the same position because they're more generated from the content part of the process. Okay, so maybe just another view to look at that is you start with noise, you have your style image, you have your content image, and you calculate your style loss function, you calculate your feature loss function, you have the total loss, and then from that you update the gradient, generate an image that minimizes both of those loss functions that you have. Now one problem or slight problem to it, it's quite time consuming, so it requires many passes through the network to get the actual images back, because you have to do the loss function both on the content, both on the style, and until your noise image changes into something that really resembles what you wanted, a lot of passes are required. So what one team from Stanford University then made out of that is they developed fast style transfer. So you train a neural network to do the actual style transfer. And so instead of that representation that we have before, you trained a new network, and you have to train the new network after some specific style image. You start with the CNN with the losses as before, but through this training stage you learn that the network always will minimize those both of those loss functions for any image as input. And so when you're done with training, you can just stylize an image with one single forward pass and it will generate the approximate image. Here some ideas from their paper. So here is one time style from Picasso, and then here two input images of a baby and of some kitchen here, and how it looks in the Picasso style. Or you don't need to take artist, you can also take the Simpsons as a style image and use that as input with Simpson style, and then you get the guy here a bit in Simpson style with a lot of yellow and blue here. There's actually some nice examples. So this one does the computation of the style transfer given both an input image and a style image, and calculates both of them. So this takes a bit longer time, but you can just use any of the two images that you have. If you want to try out the fast style transfer, this is a nice package available that that allows you just to do the fast style transfer. So in order that it works, you either have to train your network first for a specific style, or you can just use that one of the weight files that they provide for the style transfer. Okay, sorry, I missed the questions. Do we calculate the lost content only between one layer? Yes, I think so. They found out that they use just one layer, not exactly the latest, but someone quite far in the network, and then have the loss functions only with that. From the whole setup, you could use loss functions between different layers, but with most of the applications, they just chosen one of the layers at the end, and that seems to work fine. We'll later do an interactive demo here. I played around a little bit with some images from Zurich. So with some style transfer in some Japanese image style, or I think one was Kandinsky, and some other different styles here. Okay, let's quickly look at the website there, because this is quite nice. Let me get find it. Oh, first I have to open it. Okay, so this is actually the GitHub repository of that, and then you can produce those images. It also works for videos, and they have some detailed setup how to do this. So this would work. They adapted it to TensorFlow 2.1. Actually, I tried it out on TensorFlow 2.2, and that works fine. So you could either then train your own style, or you could just evaluate one of the styles of the models and then generate the result here. So here just some more of the input parameters, and there is a link here about some the different styles that they have pre-trained, and so you have different models here that you can download and then to apply to the style transfer. So maybe let's try that. I have some photo here that I took last year. I was in Japan last year, so this is a photo of Osaka. And now let's try what happens when we apply that style transfer to that image here. So I will evaluate it with this checkpoint that I have downloaded. In pass is that image and out pass is new image. And so now it will just run once through the network to generate the image there. It seems to need a lot of memory, so it complains a little bit about the memory. Okay, I will find. Okay, so let's see how that looks like. So then the resulting image of that looks like that. So this pre-compute style now on this now rather rainy looking picture of Osaka there. Okay, so that was actually all for today. So rather a bit a small lecture just to finish some I think quite interesting other application of what you can do with guns. So there were some questions about the exam. So some error message from YouTube. So for the exam, the questions will be online in a form of a quiz. I think I said already on home office. And so the question is, will we need to code? I don't think so, but maybe you will be asked about some code, or maybe you could just outline how you would code something, but not code it exactly. At least for my part, I think it will be the same part for Alessandro Giusti, but I will ask him so that we clarify that. But I would say no, coding is not needed for the exams in details. Then also note the homework, the second homework with the texture recognition. You should submit by end of the week. No, I have not received the date yet for the exam, which I also find a little bit strange. I will tell you as soon as we know. For the time frame, it's usually on the same time than when the lecture was, so it should be on Tuesday morning. The question is just which Tuesday morning it will be. Yeah, so at least the date should be fine. Any questions about further questions about the homework? I also tried my solution from last year running up again, and first of all, I had to change some of the things to get it running on TensorFlow 2, which works now, and generally it's a bit faster on TensorFlow 2. From the results here, my results, and also remember from last year, are not that great. So you get some accuracy that should be much better than a chance, but I think I only got up to like on the validation to like 17 or 18% higher on the training, but that's of course not really better. That's just overfitting. Anybody else got some nice results already from the homework? Yes, the color patches with the black and white, I got even less. But I will run some more experiments. I just didn't have the time yet on the computer. Yeah. Okay, 22. That's nice. I think that's a good result. 10% is also it's good. No, black and white is enough. So if you do the color patches, you really have to do it by data set because it will not fit the memory. So the idea is, I think it's more, what I would like to see is that you were able to come up with the network, to program the networks, and to get it running. So the black and white images are enough for that. Just if you feel ambitious and you see who gets the best result, then you will get better result on the color tiles, and it's much more, but it's also a bit more challenging, and you probably need a GPU to get some decent results, because it will take a while. Yeah. Okay, now I will have to see that I beat the 22.8. Huh? What kind of network was it? Okay, nice. I think I tried two larger ones. I didn't have that much better results with the up and down sampling. What I think helped in my networks was some batch normalization, but maybe it was just then faster for the calculation. But I have only run a few episodes up to now. Is it okay to do early stopping on the validation loss or only training? I'm not quite sure what you mean here. So with early stopping, you would actually, yeah, you have to look at the training and validation loss together to determine early stopping. So because if you only look at the training loss, it's difficult to find out what your good time is for the early stopping. So generally, you would look at training and validation loss and determine, okay, early stopping is good after 20 episodes. And then even if you have more data, you would only train for 20 episodes, because you think you determined like kind of a hyperparameter, but this is what it's needed to train the network. Actually, I have to look at the quizzes in Moodle, what is available, because I have not used them yet. I will suggest together with Alessandro that we provide at least some sample questions in that quiz format, so that you could try it before and you see how the interface looks like. There will be multiple choice questions, but I hope we can also incorporate other questions. So I could see that it just maybe just ask a question, you just have to answer as you would fill out some questions by hand. You just answer it, and it will be graded manually by us. Yeah. But then we might make sure that we include, if the different types of questions, that we include one of each type. Yeah. Yes, so semester is finished, so I think we will work on it as soon as possible. Yeah. Okay, any more questions? Otherwise, I suggest I finish the stream here. I will still be available on Discord. The question is also, should we have the Discord running? Usually, Alessandro, we shut it off outside of the hours. I will discuss with him if we can have some, what the channel would be for discussions of the for your preparation of the exam. We will let you know if we have it on Discord. Otherwise, I would suggest to use the forums on Moodle, the announcement, so that you can ask questions there, and we will reply to them there, and then everybody gets a mail and also sees the answers on the same page then. Okay, one more question. The larger the border, the easier the task is. Not really. It actually means you just have less training data, because if you have larger border, you will lose some of the training data on the border. But it could be that some of the tiles are really not that good at the edge, around the border, at the edge of the image, and so if you cut a larger border, you might be more on the relevant part of the texture, and that might improve your results. Ideally, what I would usually do, if I would do this as for an application, is if you have the network, that you cut out your tiles so that the borders overlap, so that you don't lose any of the pixels. So if they like if you lose 10 pixels in the border, you make your tiles overlap by those 10 pixels, so that you don't that you will use all of the pixels of your original image anyway. Yeah? But of course, you have a different amount of training data depending on the border, so that will affect your results. Okay, otherwise I think this is all for now. So please, if you have any questions, contact us. We will let you know as soon as possible about the exam date, and we will provide some sample quiz so that you see how those questions work. So I think it was nice for the class. I hope it was nice for you too. So sorry we had it in this format, but I hope you could benefit it from that anyway. So hopefully see you then sometimes in class again in the fall semester, and I hope it was okay like that. So then see you at the latest at the exam. Don't forget to hand in the homework, and contact us if you have any questions. So bye bye for now, and have a nice day.